They told us Africa had no kings. That before slavery, before colonization, there was only chaos. No crowns, no empires, no greatness. But what if I told you that was the biggest lie in history? Because buried beneath the deserts, the jungles, and the dust of 1,000 stolen years are the names of men who ruled before Europe had kings at all. Warriors, visionaries, philosophers, who built cities of gold, commanded armies that stretched across continents, and left legacies so powerful that even time couldn't kill them. Yet their stories were erased, not by accident, but by design. History tried to paint Africa as a place of darkness. But these kings, they were the light. 7 kings, each one powerful enough to rewrite everything you thought you knew about civilization. And for 100 years, the world has tried to bury their names. But tonight, we unearth them. Because the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Not when the ancestors still whisper. Long before Europe rose to power, before the word king echoed through Western tongues, Africa already had its lion. His name was Sundiata Keita, a boy born crippled, in a land divided by war, fear, and rival tribes. They said he would never walk. They said he would never rule. But destiny doesn't ask for permission. In the 13th century, the land of Mali was broken. Greedy warlords fought for control, and the spirit of the people was fading. Then came whispers that a child had been born under a prophecy, a child who would unite the kingdoms and build an empire of gold. That child was Sundiata. As a boy, he was mocked, dragged through the dust by those who saw weakness in his bent legs. But when his mother cried to the ancestors, something changed. They say the spirits of the old kings answered. One day, before the eyes of the whole village, Sundiata pulled himself up from the ground and stood. The drums stopped. The air went still. The crippled boy took his first steps, and the earth itself seemed to tremble. From that day, he was no longer a boy. He was the Lion of Mali. Years later, when invaders from the west and north swept across the land, Sundiata gathered warriors from every tribe, men who had once been enemies, and forged them into one unstoppable force. He rode across the savannas, his golden armor shining beneath the African sun, his banner a roaring lion. And when the Battle of Karina came, he faced the sorcerer king Semanguru, a ruler who was said to wield dark magic, his skin painted with ash, his eyes glowing red. The clash between them was more than war. It was the battle between darkness and light, between fear and freedom, between erasure and legacy. When Sundiata's arrow struck the sorcerer down, the war ended, but something greater began. He built an empire so vast it stretched from the Atlantic coast to the edge of the Sahara. Timbuktu became its heart, a city of scholars, poets, and astronomers, a place where gold was as common as dust, and wisdom was worth more than any jewel. He established laws that protected women, traders, and even prisoners of war, centuries before Europe ever wrote about human rights. Under his rule, Mali became a beacon of civilization, a place where black kings wrote history in stone and gold. And yet, the history books barely whisper his name. They tell us about Alexander, about Caesar, but not Sundiata, the boy who couldn't walk, who stood and made the earth remember him. So when you hear the word king, remember this. Africa had its kings long before Europe even dreamed of crowns, and the Lion of Mali was their roar. In the 17th century, while Europe carved maps of Africa like a thief dividing gold, one woman turned her throne into a battlefield. Her name was Queen Zingamband, and she ruled the kingdoms of Ndongo and Matamba, lands that today lie within Angola. The Portuguese called her savage. History calls her unstoppable. When their ships appeared on her shores, they came with crosses and cannons. They demanded tribute. They demanded land. They demanded souls. But Nzinga didn't bow. She negotiated. At her first meeting with the Portuguese governor, they offered no chair, hoping to make her kneel. She motioned to one of her attendants, and without a word, the woman knelt on hands and knees. Nzinga sat upon her back and met the governor eye to eye. That moment became legend. It wasn't diplomacy, it was a declaration. You will never look down on me. She learned the enemy's language, read their treaties, then turned every clause into a weapon. When diplomacy failed, she became a general. She dressed in armor, rode with her soldiers, and fought from the front lines. The Portuguese called her the Black Panther, because she struck vanished into the jungle, and struck again. Her armies included freed slaves, escaped prisoners, even Portuguese deserters, people who found in her something worth dying for. And as the invaders burned villages and built forts, Nzinga built alliances, forging one of the first united resistance networks in Central Africa. For 40 years, she defied Europe's power, turning a small kingdom into a fortress of rebellion. But Nzinga wasn't driven by rage alone. She was building a legacy. She created laws that protected women and children, invited refugees from neighboring lands, and founded a capital built on freedom rather than fear. When she finally made peace, it was on her terms. No surrender, no submission, only sovereignty. When she died at 81, the Portuguese called it a victory. But in truth, they mourned relief. Because for decades, one black woman had held an empire in check with nothing but will. Today her statue stands in Luanda, a bronze queen on horseback, eyes fixed on the sea. Beneath her feet, the ocean still carries the ghosts of ships she defied. Her story is more than resistance. It's proof that courage wears many crowns, and that even when history forgets a name, courage remembers itself. They tried to erase them, from the scrolls of empires, from the pages of school books, from the whispers that shape what we believe to be civilization. But the truth doesn't die, it waits. It hides in the ruins of forgotten temples, beneath the dust of libraries burned by time, inside stories carried by elders who refuse to forget. From the deserts of Nubia to the green heart of Congo, from the gold of Mali to the thunder plains of Zululand, these kings ruled not with greed, but with vision. They built worlds where justice wore a crown, where learning was a weapon sharper than steel, and where the color of their skin was a symbol of power, not shame. They called them myths, but every myth begins with truth. Mansa Musa, who turned sand into gold and gold into legacy. Nzinga, who faced an empire and refused to bow. Shaka Zulu, whose strategy redefined warfare. Pai, Taharka, Sundiata, Menelik, kings whose names echo in the soil like heartbeat thunder. Each one left behind a message, carved in time. We were here. We led. We built. We mattered. Today, you stand where their stories end, and where yours begins. Because history isn't just something you study. It's something you inherit. And when you tell their stories, you become part of the bloodline they tried to erase. So let their names be your reminder. Let their victories be your map. Let their courage be your reflection. Because no matter how deep they bury the truth, Black history will always rise. They tried to silence the kings, but the crown still speaks. When the first Portuguese sailors reached the West African coast in the 15th century, they expected to find chaos, tribes, huts, and dust. But what they found instead left them speechless. Rising from the green forests and riverbanks was a city of light. Walls so wide a horse could gallop across them. Streets perfectly aligned. Palaces that glittered with bronze and ivory. The people called it Edo, but history would remember it as Benin, the kingdom that ruled the sea. At its heart stood a man they called Oba Uwere the Great, a king of vision, order, and unshakable power. Under his rule, Benin became a masterpiece, a city so well planned that when Europeans saw it, they compared it to ancient Rome itself. Except this city was older, and built by black hands. The Oba's palace stood at the center, a maze of courtyards and towers decorated with bronze plaques that told the stories of kings, warriors, and gods. These plaques weren't just art. They were history, sculpted in metal, each one a heartbeat of memory. Benin's craftsmen were so skilled. Their lost wax bronze technique couldn't be replicated for centuries. Europeans studied it, confused. How could Africans make this? They whispered. But they didn't record their wonder. They recorded their fear, because Benin was a mirror, showing the world that Africa had risen long before Europe ever arrived. Uwere's empire stretched across rivers and coasts, its merchants trading with Egypt, Arabia, and beyond. Ships carved from redwood glided across the Niger Delta, carrying ivory, coral, and cloth so fine it shimmered like water. And when rival nations came to test him, Uwere unleashed warriors whose bronze helmets reflected the sun, men who moved like storms, their chants echoing across the jungle. For nearly 2 centuries, the kingdom of Benin stood untouched, a beacon of order, art, and brilliance, until the day Europe returned, not with gifts, but with guns. In 1897, British forces marched on Benin, under the excuse of trade disputes. But what they really came for was gold, ivory, and power. They burned the city to the ground. Palaces turned to ash. Statues melted in fire. Thousands of sacred bronzes were stolen, shipped off to museums where they still sit today, labeled as artifacts, but never as evidence. Evidence that Africa once led the world in civilization. The Oba was exiled, his people scattered, but the spirit of Benin never died, because the bronzes still speak. Every face carved into them, every warrior, every king, every mother, whispers a story too powerful to erase. And though the world buried the kingdom of Benin under smoke and lies, its fire still burns in the blood of every African artist, every builder, every dreamer. Today, historians admit what they once denied. That Benin's architecture, its city walls, its very planning, was more advanced than London at the same time. So the next time you walk through a museum and see those bronzes behind glass, remember, they are not trophies. They are survivors, the ghosts of kings who ruled the sea, and whose voices are rising again, because no fire can burn truth forever. Before Egypt wore the crown of gold, there was another throne, carved from black granite, standing where the Nile bends into red desert. Its kings were darker than the river's night waters, its queens fierce as fire. They called their land Kush. To the world, it was the roof of Africa. To Egypt, it was the south that whispered power. For centuries, Egypt looked down on Kush, until one man turned the river north and reversed history. His name was Pi, son of the mountain god. They say Pi rode with warriors whose shields gleamed like mirrors in the sun. He crossed the Nile not to destroy Egypt, but to restore it. At that time, Egypt was broken, dozens of petty rulers fighting for scraps. Pi saw a land that had forgotten the meaning of order. So he marched north, city after city opening its gates before him, not from fear, but from awe. When he reached Memphis, the old capital, the people lined the walls and watched a king from Nubia take Egypt back without burning it. He entered the temple, washed himself in holy water, and placed the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt on his head. For the first time in centuries, the Nile had one ruler again, a black pharaoh from the south. Pi didn't stay to boast. He returned to Kush, to the cliffs of Jebel Barkal, and carved a temple there that still faces the sunrise. Its columns rise from the sand like fingers reaching for heaven. Its walls tell the story of a king who united two worlds and reminded Egypt who had taught it to build. After him came Taharka, the warrior pharaoh who stood against Assyria's empire. His armies stretched from Sudan to the Mediterranean. In the Book of Kings, his name appears beside Hezekiah, proof that his power was felt across continents. Taharka built pyramids smaller than Giza's, but steeper, pointing sharply to the sky as if to pierce eternity itself. He raised temples in Thebes and Napata, filled with statues whose faces still bear the calm of kings who knew their worth. And yet, when Europe later wrote Egypt's story, these faces were cropped out of the frame. The line of Kush, the 25th dynasty, was brushed aside, as if Africa could not rule Africa. But the stones never lied. Archaeologists now call it the Age of the Black Pharaohs. DNA, inscriptions, temples, all tell the same story, that the heart of Egypt once beat from the south. So when the wind howls through the pyramids of Meroe, it isn't just sand moving. It's the voice of the desert kings saying, "We built long before they wrote." Because history might bend, but truth, like the Nile, always finds its way back home. When Sundiata's empire became legend, another lion rose from the dust of Mali, a man whose name would echo across oceans. They called him Mansa Musa, the King of Kings. But even that title was too small, because when Musa ruled, the world bent toward Mali. He was born into gold, yet taught to respect it. The empire's mines glittered beneath his feet. Its scholars filled Timbuktu with books thicker than bricks. Under Musa, knowledge was currency, and trade routes were arteries carrying the lifeblood of Africa to every shore. Caravans stretched for miles, camels heavy with salt, ivory, and cloth so fine it shone like sunlit water. And when he decided to make his pilgrimage to Mecca, the earth itself seemed to move. They say 60,000 people followed him. Soldiers, scholars, merchants, singers, and each camel carried gold enough to blind the desert. Across the Sahara they marched, through heat that melted steel, until the dunes began to glitter with dust kicked up by his army's feet. In Cairo, the world finally saw him. The Sultan met him with trumpets and silk, but nothing could match Musa's presence. He gave away so much gold that the value of gold itself collapsed. For 12 years, the richest man in history didn't just possess wealth. He reshaped the economy of nations without raising a sword. But Musa's power wasn't greed. He built mosques and schools, brought architects from Andalusia and Egypt to craft a new city of light on African soil. When the great Djinguereber Mosque rose from the sands of Timbuktu, its towers carved from red clay and memory, Musa stood beside his people and said, "Let the world see what we can build." And the world did. Scholars traveled from Europe and Arabia to study under black teachers. Books replaced weapons. Ideas crossed borders faster than armies. For a moment in history, before colonizers, before chains, Africa led the world in gold, science, and faith. When Mansa Musa died, his body returned to dust, but his name turned immortal. Even today, economists call him the richest human to ever live. But wealth was never his true treasure. His real empire was memory. Every grain of sand that still blows across Mali's plains carries a spark of his story. Every young dreamer who studies under a roof built from red clay walks in the shadow of a man who proved that greatness needs no permission. Because Musa didn't wait for the world to crown him. He crowned himself with purpose, and the world finally bowed. If you've made it this far, then you already feel it. That pulse of pride, that fire of truth they tried to hide. These stories weren't just history. They're proof that greatness runs through our blood. So don't let it stop here. If this story moved you, hit that like button so more voices can rise. Drop a comment and tell us which king or queen inspired you most. And if you believe these stories deserve to live forever, then subscribe, because we're not done uncovering the truth they buried. Every week, another hidden chapter rises from the ashes. Another name returns to the throne. Because here, we don't rewrite history, we restore it.